Thank you, Sherry. I just realized that I was on mute. Thank you so much. So I'm going to repeat myself. Everyone, we are now only 1 minute away from getting started here. As a way to acknowledge that we are here with each other live, could you please use the question box here in the side panel? And really quick, tell me where you're tuning in from and what do you expect to get out of this webinar? Thanks for that, Sherry, again. Appreciate it. Jack, welcome. Looks like you also caught up my technical mistake here. In the meantime, while everybody gets ready to tell me where they're tuning in from, we're broadcasting this webinar from Mercer Island. Our guest presenter is based in Seattle. We're both located in the greater Seattle metropolitan area, and it's a beautiful day. And I'm so excited to see so many of you who have joined us early. And looks like we're now in top of the hour, but really quick. Welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us. She is from Northeastern Ohio. Roman Bamberger from Switzerland. We have a global audience. It's always really nice to see. Sherry, again, she is from Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Thank you. And Jack is from New Jersey, Bridgewater, New Jersey. Welcome, Jack. All right, so looks like it's top of the hour now, officially. And we have a pretty good size audience, so I'm gonna get started here. For those who just joined, thank you for joining us today. This is your host, Alonso. And I wanna welcome you to today's webinar on transforming sales training with collaborative learning. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items, housekeeping items, so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see something that looks like the screenshot on this slide on your computer in the upper right corner of your screen. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane in the webinar's sidebar to access the dial-in information. You'll have access, you have the opportunity to submit text, questions and comments by typing them into the question pane of the control panel, just like we did early on to introduce ourselves. We'll also address the questions in a moment or at the end of the session. Now, I'm going to slow down here because this is a very important part of this webinar. These live interactive webinars work because of you and because of the other people who are part of it. There are two rules that will help you make the most of this event. Number one, be generous. Every time there is a new chat or question, chime in. Not because you're an expert, not because you're smarter than everyone, but because you are generous. Rule number two, go first. When asked to participate, if you're nervous or would prefer to follow, don't. It's a safe place, so try it out and put it out there for the rest of us. Finally, we are recording this webinar and we will be sending you a copy in a follow-up email today. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters today. We have Ray Makela, CEO of the Sales Readiness Group, and our special guest, Sam Herring, VP and General Manager at Intrepid by VitalSource. Ray and Sam, I would like to welcome you, and if you could really quick turn your cameras on so the audience has a chance to see you here live today.
Ray, I think you're still on mute.
We seem to have the lip reading contest today. So again, this is Ray Makela from Sales Readiness Group. I really appreciate everybody joining us today. And Alonso, thank you for getting us started. And I just wanted to say to Alonso's points up front, since this webinar is about collaborative learning, it's great to get the participation from the audience. And also I'd like to say by way of introduction, Sam, how much I've enjoyed collaborating with you and your team at Intrepid on putting this together and discussing this topic and kind of where we're headed today. So really excited to kick things off. You know, what I'd like to do just by way of introductions is just give you a little bit of a chance, Sam, if you would, to introduce yourself, your company, and how you come to this topic today, because again, thrilled with the insights and experience that you're bringing and looking forward to collaborating with you on it.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to join us in this conversation. And Alonzo, love what you said up front about being generous, and Ray about modeling collaboration in the conversation here. So, I lead the Intrepid by VitalSource team. We at VitalSource provide a collaborative learning platform, an adaptive learning platform, and a content delivery platform as part of the VitalSource suite of products. I'm relatively new to the VitalSource team. I led the Intrepid business, which was acquired about 18 months ago. Prior to that, I led another learning business that was acquired by Xerox. So I've been in the corporate learning space for about 20 years. Love it. Love collaborating and love being part of this family. And Ray, right back at you. Really have enjoyed working with you, preparing for this webinar, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And by way of that, Sam, I'll just say we come up to this topic from different angles, but with a lot of the same outcomes, a lot of the same objectives in mind. And specifically as we think about your platform and the infrastructure that you bring to enable a lot of what we're going to be talking about. And then I'll just say a little bit about Sales Readiness Group. So for those who aren't familiar, we are a sales and sales management training company. As Alonzo mentioned, I'm a partner and managing director. Been here about 7 years, both delivering, overseeing, and now kind of running the training operations here. And so to make this successful, as we'll talk about, you need both the platform and infrastructure, and you need great content, and you really need to have that vetted content that you can bring to the table. And so I think, as we'll share, bringing those two things together is really what makes it successful. So again, thanks again, Sam. Let's get into it. I know we have a lot to cover, and I know we're both passionate about this topic. So let's go ahead and turn our webcams off. We'll save a little bit of bandwidth here, and also clean up the slides. And then let's jump into it. So by way of agenda, we have really kind of 4 key themes, the journey we're going to be going on today. We're going to talk about sales as it's changing. And I know people have heard about that. I know a lot of people follow changes in the industry, but we want to talk about what's changing that's really requiring us to rethink how we approach sales, how we approach sales training, and the collaboration. So kind of what's driving that, and what some of the common challenges are with traditional training that we've seen over the years, that you've seen over the years, Sam, and how that's really driving us to think differently about this, which then we'll get into this idea of collaborative learning and what does that mean and what value does it provide. And then I think it's really important to say, okay, so what, who cares? Where is this being done? What's some of the value and outcomes we can look for? And what are some key takeaways that we can share? So Sam, before we get into the other slides, any general comments or thoughts that you have? I'd love to get your input as we go along here, but just in terms of these topics and where we're headed today.
No, thanks, Ray. No, I think you framed it up really well. We'll warm up, have some activities to kind of get your perspectives, and then we'll reflect back on this change we see to a more collaborative, engaging, and applied world of learning, and have hopefully some real good tips for you to get started. So, yeah, excited to get in there. Thanks, Ray.
That's great. Yeah, so, to this idea of sales is changing, and I think the top one, as people know, customers are more informed. They're further through the sales process. We've all heard that, they're 2/3 of the way through, typically before they even engage with a sales professional. It's requiring our sales professionals to be quicker, smarter, kind of a little bit more nimble. And I think that's almost a given now that that's going on. But some of these others, I think, are also important to realize, is the customers now have access to way more information. They're getting inundated with background, with research, with data. And while our customers are getting more sophisticated and there are more buyers involved in the typical sale, there are also more sellers involved. And oftentimes we have integrated teams who are going out and selling, and we have sales engineers and architects and solution consultants that are part of our team. So we need to be better and smarter and able to collaborate. And our customers are requiring us to bring better insights and more information and really think more intently about their business as we come. So I'll save the last one, we'll come back to, but what thoughts do you have? How have you seen this come up in your business, Sam? And some of these trends that I know we're all sensitive to, but what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think I'd probably just point out or sum up that because of the access to information that customers have, it just raises the bar for the salesperson to be an educator, a coach, a teacher, and in some cases a challenger of clients. And so it's no longer okay to sit back and just kind of take orders. That those processes are automated and people already have information. So it's really about how you help solve problems. How does a salesperson help solve problems, and how do they bring insights to the client organization to help them solve those problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think as we're looking at, enabling the future of the sales profession, what are the skills that are required to be able to do that? How do we help them become great learners, as you mentioned, and really interpret a lot of that? The last bullet point here around technology and AI, it's obviously really exciting the kind of insights you can get both about your sales process as well as about your customers, but you also need to be able to interpret that, and you need to figure out what that's really saying or what to do about it. And there's nothing worse than taking a bunch of data and drawing the wrong conclusions from it. So I think those are things that are continuing to drive change in our industry and in the way that we're approaching sales training. So, one of the things that we'd like to do is, as we mentioned, get input from our audience. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a poll here. And what I'd like to do is get the input on from our audience about the biggest challenges that our leaders are facing today. So, when we think about what's going on, and we should see this launching here, okay? So if you could pick an option here that best aligns with what you think your sales leaders are facing today. And it's tough because just choosing one, but in terms of what's on their mind or what's on your mind as a sales leader, additional competition and disruption, is it not being able to find good skill sets? The sophistication of our buyers, as we talked about, maybe it's getting our arms around the sales stack and the technology that we need, and being able to enable and train that. Or ramping up and onboarding and getting the new hires to hit those new growth targets. So we'll get the poll results. I see people chiming in here. We'll publish that shortly. But Sam, what do you think, given these 5 choices, what do you think we're going to see here? What are some of the options that you've seen with your clients?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't be, kind of prognosticating here a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some votes for C, based on what we've just been talking about. I think E we hear a lot as well. Sorry, the third, more sophisticated buyers, more stakeholders, developing new hires. So yeah, I'm excited to see what people think.
Yeah, we'll just give this another minute. I can see the responses kind of settling out here, and probably not surprising, the results as they break out. And I think you're spot on, Sam, in terms of how we're seeing the distribution. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here, and this should publish this as well. So all right, so you should be seeing the results now on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we've got a pretty even break between, increased competition, the sophistication of our buyers, and, trying to ramp up and hit those aggressive targets, kind of about 25% spread across those. And then, to a little lesser effect or impact, the technology and the scarcity of the skill set. So, I think it's interesting to look at that. We are trying to balance multiple priorities. This is a bit of a challenging poll just because it's hard to pick one, right? My guess is most organizations probably have some combination of those top 3 and maybe a few of the others as well. And the point here is really, as we look at the challenges that are facing our sales leaders and our sales organizations, what are we doing from a training perspective, and what are we doing to enable the future sales force to be able to address that? When we think about the competition, when we think about the sophistication of the buyers, when we think about ramping up and onboarding. I think those are things that we can address through training and the platform, but we need to be thoughtful about that.
Yeah, one thing that strikes me is just how nimble organizations have to be to accomplish these areas of priority, because competition is such a dynamic environment, and buyers are increasingly sophisticated. There's just the ability to move quickly and with agility is so important.
Absolutely, and I think that really is the takeaway here is all of these things, we can't do a once a year in-person workshop and expect people to be able to respond to the competition, to be able to align with a sophisticated buyer, to be able to ramp up quickly and hit those growth targets if we're treating training as an event. And so I think that really sets the stage for it needing to be an ongoing kind of blended approach, and also having the opportunity to collaborate, with your colleagues. So, to your point, Sam, when we think about this modern salesperson, and I know this is an area where we both thought a lot about and written some, that mindset of the learner. And, as we think about the future of learning and the future of the sales team, having that curiosity about the customer's business, thinking really as the consultant, which isn't new, but I think it's even more important now than ever. And Sam, maybe you could speak a little bit more to the second bullet point, that idea of not just being a challenger, bringing insights, but being able to educate and really influence the customer in that sales process, and how that comes out. What are you seeing out there around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Really mastering the customer's business, deeply understanding the industry that they serve, understanding the dynamics that are happening in their industry or in their horizontal, and then understanding how your offerings are going to be part of that industry solution. So we're going to talk in a little bit about a Microsoft example, but one example there would be, if you're a salesperson serving manufacturing, it's you obviously need to understand what's happening with digital disruption in manufacturing, but you actually have to go a little deeper. It's like, how does blockchain going to impact manufacturing? How is Internet of Things going to impact manufacturing? What are the AI trends? So it's just the bar has been raised to a level of sophistication that is really key. So you back that out and it becomes like the salesperson has to truly prioritize being an expert and developing their capabilities and developing themselves as a learner.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think it really speaks to the last 2 points as well, which is, the future organization, sales organization, needs to have that culture of coaching, needs to continue to adopt and expand that culture of coaching that says, hey, we're going to continue to improve. High performing organizations are one that say, no, we always want to be pushing the envelope. We want to be working on those skills. We want to be learning and improving. And we need to see that as a continuous process, again, not as an event. And, I know we've both done work with and very familiar with some of Chris Peary's work, came from the Microsoft background, was one of the chief learning officers there, and managed a global sales enablement program. He's now CEO of the Learning Futures Group. And one of the quotes as we were collaborating with him that really struck me and stuck with me was the idea of, to be relevant, salespeople need to become not just great learners, but great teachers, right? It's a new skill set that they need to be able to educate and teach and lead their customers, and they need to be nimble and kind of foster that lifelong learning approach. And Sam, I know you've worked with Chris as well, and probably heard him say that, but what other thoughts do you have about that, the idea of the salesperson as a learner and teacher?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's absolutely essential, particular, and there's a real opportunity here. It's not just all challenges. It's a real opportunity to stand out, and in the opportunity in the context of digital disruption, to be that guide and be that expert and really help an organization overcome its challenges, because oftentimes they don't know, and it frankly it elevates the role of sales. sales is the front line of the customer relationship, and it can take on, you know, new power and new value in the whole customer relationship equation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And hey, Sam, I just want to confirm from your perspective, you're seeing the slides now that are required of the modern salesperson slide.
Yes. Yep. Perfect.
Great. Okay. Got us. So let's continue on here. You know, this was really just to set up the conversation of sales is changing. We think training it needs to change and adapt as well, and even the salesperson of the future needs to adapt. So that's kind of the, you know, if we're talking about the hero's journey, that's the challenge that we're presented with. So what do we do about it? And so let's get into that and talk about, you know, why maybe traditional sales training doesn't meet the mark in this new world, in this new environment, and what we can do about it. So what we'd like to do is, again, engage the audience, and this is where we use the question feature. So if you could, using the question block, you can just respond into that window. And what I'd like you to do is talk about what are your most significant sales training challenges today? You know, what are the things you run into as an organization? What are the things that are holding you back from accomplishing your goals? You know, what's getting in the way of good training that you need to accomplish your objectives? So I'll give people a second here to respond. And again, just do that into the question box on the right-hand panel there.
This will be interesting, Ray, as everyone's working on this, to see the connection between, you know, the high-level challenges in the sales organization and how that's showing up as sales training challenges. I'm looking forward to hearing what people have to say.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and show the results as they're coming in here, because I think we have some really interesting comments. You know, Nicole mentions the geographic dispersed salespeople, and it's expensive to bring together. And, you know, I think that's certainly something we've all experienced, we've seen, but unfortunately, you know, a lot of the distributed or asynchronous training hasn't met the mark, right? The just e-learning libraries, or, you know, to some extent, even the virtual learning libraries or learning mode does not satisfy the need the way that we'd like to. So Roman has kind of a specific just lack of probing, so a selling skill. They're pushing products still, so they need to address that through different mechanisms. Bob mentions it's too expensive. You know, Amy calls out breaking old habits and trying something new. So, you know, how do we practice those skills? How do we put it into place? And I love Bob's comment around not quick enough, right? I think that goes back to our theme, you know, about being agile and being able to adapt to the market and to our customers. Sam, anything jump out to you, or any comments on some of those themes that we're seeing?
And those are fantastic, you know, and those are just the wisdom truly of the group assembled today. These are the kinds of things we hear. You know, speed. If we had, you know, Chris, who's a past guest on your webinar here, that's what he would lead with. You know, how do you move fast to keep up with the business? The breaking old habits, the ability to actually practice in a whether it's in an in-person or digital environment, and then how do you scale an engaging and an applied learning experience that rivals the classroom experience. These are just tremendous challenges. Good stuff.
Yeah, no, really good insights, and I love some of these. Like Matilda mentions, you know, salespeople won't go to passive methods to work on their skills, and I think we see that, you know, whether it's generational or by industry, you know, that people just don't want to sit through 2 or 3 days of kind of lecture and take that away, and they need it to be very interactive, and they need to participate, and as we'll talk about, they need to collaborate, right? So they can collaborate with others, and as she mentioned, work with a coach. Now we're actually able to see behavior change and see those skills changing. So also, as Kim mentions, the overload of information, which, you know, now we get inundated, we have all this access, we have all this information we're supposed to consume. What do we do with it, and how do we apply it? So definitely some good themes here as we're looking through what the group's saying. Okay, well, thank you everyone for responding. Number of great responses. Again, we have a wonderful audience and very interactive, so I appreciate that. You know, some themes around speed, some themes around how do we facilitate that to make it engaging. Lucas actually mentions tracking the performance. You know, are they actually doing things differently, and is it making a difference? So, you know, I think those are all important things to keep in mind. So, thank you again for everybody who participated. And let's kind of summarize, you know, we see the challenges, and these are the things that our audience are up against. We've also collected over the years our own kind of best practices and our own samples of why isn't training being successful in organizations that, frankly, we often get called in because another training initiative wasn't successful, or they did something a few years ago and it didn't stick and the binders are sitting on the shelf. You know, so we find a number of these kind of common reasons, from sponsorship to they're looking at training to fix a problem that may be process or strategy related. You know, we don't really know what the outcomes are, or how we're going to measure the results, or maybe we've over-engineered. So to the comment from the audience about there's too much information, there's overload, and then we give them this very complex program that nobody wants to follow, right? So I think we've seen all of those, as well as we kind of get a rejection from the audience often if it feels like it's off the shelf or it's too generic. You know, it's not tailored to their situation. And the last one, and I'd be interested in thoughts and takeaways you have here, Sam. You know, the last one about not reinforcing the skills, not being able to apply the skills, and you know, what are we doing to make sure that behaviors change after the training? And I think if I had to pick one out of this list that we see most often, it's that, oh yeah, the training was great, we loved it, but nothing happened afterwards, and there was no mechanism to collaborate and coach and keep those skills alive. What are you seeing in your business, Sam?
For sure. I mean, the personalization, the application, and the creating habits, building behaviors that stick. Those are the perennial challenges, and the ones that we're most intently focused on with our customers and partners.
Yeah, great. So, you know, these are kind of what are we trying to address, and then one of the ways we can do that, and going back to, you know, sales is changing, training is changing, is we need some other mechanisms to be able to address that. So, you know, as we talked about the need for speed, that was a theme from our audience, and also being able to distribute that, being able to scale a training environment, you know, kind of beyond just the individual facilitator. I think these are all things historically that have driven the need for e-learning, but unfortunately it hasn't always met the mark. So Sam, I know this is a list that we've talked about and that you've looked at very closely around, you know, the need to move to e-learning. Does this resonate with you? Anything you'd add to this list?
No, I think this is right, and obviously the participants are everyone's tracking to these. Maybe one that we haven't heard as much on is the accessibility learning, you know, in the flow of work. I mean, that's a big theme right now. It's not just mobile access, but it's just kind of when and where needed. So that's probably one thing with that. Everything else here, that truly the wisdom is in the crowds. Everyone knows that that these are the key challenges. So this is good. Good validation.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure, and I think it's one that we've known of. You know, it's not any surprise that that's been out there before. But what I'd like to do again is just get the audience feedback, and actually I'm gonna go here, and I'll just take a few comments from the audience here. But I'd love to know if we think that e-learning is part of the answer or part of the solution. What's getting in the way there? You know, so going back to our training challenge, but what's getting in the way with e-learning being successful? Because I think we'll be addressing that, or we will be addressing that through the rest of the presentation. But if you could just chat into the question box again, what are the most significant challenges that you're seeing with e-learning relative to sales training? And as we get your results here, I'll just comment as they come in. So Matilda mentions that e-learning needs to be used as a blended format with others. So must be short and sweet. Absolutely agree. And the idea that sending somebody, a 3-hour library of e-learning is probably not going to have great adoption or compliance and completion rates. Roman mentions time to design, so kind of speed to market. And Jack has an interesting comment, Sam, and maybe you could respond to this. He says, e-learning is too passive. And so I know you've worked with clients where you're changing that mindset. What do you see, or how do you address that?
Oh, Jack, preach to me, brother. Yeah, I mean, gone are the days. We hope the days are numbered for the idea that digital learning is about passive content distribution, and we are trying to attack that in all kinds of ways because learning is inherently social. Learning is applied. We learn from each other. We learn from others. So absolutely, the old models of pushing content out they can't end fast enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the comments as I'm reading through this strike me as what we've all lived through over the last 10 or 15 years, which is a lot of e-learning gets pushed out. It's very expensive. It becomes dated almost immediately. And as Tim says, it's long and boring, right? Or it's not as nimble as it needs to be. Jennifer mentions it needs to be part of a blended program and make where people aren't zoning out, right? That they're not just giving information overload. It needs to be interactive. So that's where we're headed. Version control, I love that. How are we keeping it accurate and up to date? Translation, so how do we make it relevant, localize it to the local environment, the local languages? Tracking adoption and behavior, as Lucas mentioned. So not just watching it, but what does it mean to watch it? And so I'm going to actually pause this because it's great input, and I'm anxious to get to some of the responses because I know we want to talk about how that's played out in real life examples. But wonderful feedback from the audience. Thanks again for everybody participating. Any other thoughts on that, Sam, before we move on?
No. I think everything we imagined in our debrief has kind of been identified. So no, this is great, fantastic.
Yeah, it is. Our audience always. I always learn from our audiences, and as we were trying to boil this down, I think we heard that maybe it's too generic or it's not tailored. There isn't enough opportunity to practice those skills to the real world sales environment. So we heard about that. How do we get behavior change? How do we actually practice the information? Isolated and boring. We absolutely heard that, and they're not really contributing or getting input from experts and peers as they're going through it. And I think all of that leads to the last one, which is really the death of e-learning. Is if people aren't using it, or if they don't want to complete it, it's not going to create the outcomes we're looking for. And so we need to address those challenges.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go there. Let's talk about collaborative learning. Kind of what is it, and how is it different, and what can we provide? So Sam, I know this is an area that you and your firm have looked at very closely, and I think we're in absolute alignment on all of the principles. But maybe you could walk us through this model and your definition of collaborative learning and how we're going to apply that going forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray. So I think of collaborative learning as digital learning experiences that can be blended, as a number of people have pointed out as well. So, but it really is focused on enabling learners to build skills, build behaviors over time by combining both the engaging and applied individual work and study that needs to happen in all learning experiences with truly robust peer, team, and expert interaction. So it's really that last part that has been missing from digital learning. And honestly, I would argue the applied has been missing as well. Because so often it's really about content being pushed out. So there's a lot of innovation happening right now in the space of collaborative digital learning. But I would suggest that this model here, and the best approaches contain these four elements at a minimum. So we see organizations rolling out learning experiences that are cohort driven, where teams of learners travel through an experience together with a moderator, with a coach, with an instructor, with people there to support and facilitate that learning experience. That can be, again, this can be all digital, for a global cohort. It could be, it could mix in synchronous sessions like we're having right now. It could mix in face-to-face milestone components as well. The second element is time released or spaced learning. There's so much research that shows that we frankly don't learn well in these kind of manufactured classroom environments of 4 hours or 8 hours or 16 hours, whatever. We learn over time. It takes time for learning to sink into our brains, and probably our biggest soapbox item is the application. People need time to practice, so that has to be an element, the element of practice on real world in components. The social piece, there's both unstructured social components and structured social components. So unstructured, think of lots of opportunities for discussions, for kind of open discussion forums, for the ability to comment, give comments to other people's work. To do social search, find and follow other experts in a learning community that you think are interesting and that you can learn from, and then simple things like liking content, tagging, following people. And then structured social is the real kind of the group work, doing work together as a team, because as we talked about earlier, teams is how we sell today. So, you need to be learning in teams as well. Having shared workspaces, even doing peer review of other people's work. And then some comments that came out earlier around make it short and sweet. The micro learning piece, the short bursts of content. And I think what we're talking about here is a structure in which you can have a macro learning environment that happens over time, but the content nuggets within that environment are micro, and they can stand as part of the macro learning environment, but can also stand on their own. So anyway, this is what we've seen to be super successful in collaborative learning. And I don't know, Ray, if you have any reflections on this.
Well, no, absolutely, and we're very much in sync, because I think when people often reflect back on their experiences with e-learning, or they're thinking about e-learning, generically, and that may not even be on here. I mean, it's probably around micro learning, maybe there are short topics or not, but it's not something that's a moderated experience with cohorts. There isn't an opportunity to really apply and test the concepts often. Maybe there's a quiz, but that's really just a knowledge check or kind of a level 2. There's no evidence or an artifact that they're able to apply those skills, or they're able to fill out a account plan, or they're able to put together a negotiation plan, or whatever the application of that concept might be, or to role play and demonstrate that skill in a live environment. So I think by combining those components, now we have a much richer opportunity. And I think, as we'll see, that's where the success is coming from. So I want to keep us moving here, and again, we'll make these slides available for reference, the recording. But maybe you could talk a little bit about, the value, kind of why are we doing this? Why are we approaching this with collaborative learning? And what are we looking to get out of it? What's the learning value, maybe just at a high level?
Yep. I'll hit this real quick. So you all can self-study on this one later. But the one example I'll start with, I'll just comment on as the top one. So Perennial challenge around onboarding. I think it was one of the top 3 challenges we hit up front. So we're hiring new people. How do we make them effective quickly? And this challenge we always have around, well, first of all, thinking onboarding is just like, hey, here's your key card and there's the bathroom, and what other questions do you have? Clearly we know that's not it, but it's also not force feeding people too much information too fast. So the idea of laddering information and experience over time as the learner, as the sales professional gets more experience is not a new concept. But think about how collaborative learning can help there. The idea of spaced learning over time fits perfectly with how onboarding should happen. The idea of learning with peers socially, being connected to experts, again, fits perfectly. The idea of applied work, perhaps tied to key milestones, your 30-day, your 60-day, your 90-day, your 120-day. Having those missions identified up front that the learner understands they're working towards and is doing real work, applying real work concepts, applying their learning to real work concepts. So just a few thoughts there. And I think on the next slide, Ray, the biggest proof point that we've seen for collaborative learning is the learners themselves. I mean, my gosh, that's we should probably, it's like, drop the mic moment here. We recently did a study with over 1,000 workplace professionals, and we asked them, how do you like to learn? And guess what? They said, we like to learn with and from others. So collaborative learning, and that kind of just really sealed the deal for us as we saw other modalities compared. This is how people want to learn as well.
No, I think that's great input, and I think that's very consistent with other research from training industry and others that talk about, one, collaborative, but also make it consumable, as you said, at the point of need or just in time. Give me something, because in absence of that, what are they going to do? They're going to go out to YouTube or Google and try to find some material to fill the gap, and then there's no consistency, and we can't control or we can't manage that experience. So if they want it to be collaborative and they want it just in time, well, let's figure out ways to do that. So let's talk about a couple of examples, and I'll start with one from Sales Readiness Group, and actually talk about a couple of client examples that are using this approach, and it really follows very consistently with the model you outlined, Sam. And that's the idea that we want to provide at the top of the screen the learning content. So that can be, in this case, actually blended. It can be instructor-led, virtual instructor-led, video content. We want it to be engaging. We want them to be able to access that. But that's really just kind of the content delivery, the background material that we need to cover. But then in addition to that, to make it collaborative and engaging, we need to have some missions or some assignments, right? So those fieldwork assignments where they're going to prove it, they're going to actually be able to apply the skills. And we love to do that where we're dripping out the e-learning content, if you will. So they get a certain amount of content, they get a mission to complete, they come back in and they talk about that. We can have a cohort session to talk about how that worked and challenges they have. And that really speaks to the live cohort sessions. So that opportunity to troubleshoot, to coach, to bring it back to life. And those don't have to be, half-day sessions. Those are, often 60 minutes, just a check-in. It's a coaching opportunity. We can talk about that, keep them on track, give them the next assignment and the next set of e-learning to consume, and then having access to the tools and resources just in time so they can go back, they can watch the videos, they can pull down the toolkit, they can read other materials if they want to, and ultimately, some type of, are they getting it? Are they able to apply it? And, are they working towards whether that's a certification or gamification because they're getting certain points, right, associated with completing the missions, the assignments, the videos. Now there's a wrapper around this that says, yeah, there's a reason I'm working towards this. And at the end, we can actually complete it. So we're doing this. I mean, it's really interesting. We're seeing it with, industrial services companies where we're doing multiple cohorts kicking off every month and taking them through this type of a program. We're working with a national consulting company, services company that's doing multiple cohorts, and they're bringing their best practices, they're bringing their coaching experiences and watching the videos and then discussing and collaborating and troubleshooting. And then we're also working, with other like medical device companies where they're using this to support their selling skills training, but trying to get their managers up to speed to become better coaches, again, using this blended learning kind of collaborative environment. So Sam, I know you have some experiences as well, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to both talk about that and then some of the key takeaways. So let's continue on here, and we'll get to the next piece. Any general comments on this approach, Sam, as we're going through, and how you've seen it applied in your business?
Yeah, no, I think well, let's just go there. Let's just show what that looks like in one particular example at Microsoft. You all are probably familiar with the pivot Microsoft has made to become a mobile-first, cloud-first company, and that really started with Satya Nadella taking the helm as CEO. He's been in position right now for about 5 years. And while Microsoft is obviously a perennial technology brand, they really are in the challenger position for both mobile and for cloud. And so when they thought about what that meant for them to make this huge transformation as a business, to win in the world of software as a service, they knew that they really needed to kind of reshape the skills of their sales organization, because their sales professionals were having to call on new buyers. They weren't just calling on CIOs anymore. They were calling on heads of sales, heads of marketing, heads of finance. And guess what? Those business leaders didn't want to talk speeds and feeds of technology. They wanted to talk about their part of the business. Shocker there, I know. And they also needed to talk about the whole value proposition of renting software as a subscription versus purchasing it, installing it, maintaining it. And so when we sat down with the head of sales readiness and enablement, they knew what the skill gaps were. And these were not small challenges. This was like, being able to sit down with a CEO and talk about the CEO's business and industry and advise them on the impact of digital disruption. And they were struggling with challenges around global scale with 14,000 sellers, and speed, as we talked about earlier, and real true rigor of these programs, not kind of easy check the box stuff. So on the next slide, what we did is we came up with a model along with Microsoft. In this particular case, the idea, the aha moment that our customer had was to create a cloud mini MBA. And the idea of working with some global business schools around the world that have really powerful content, and then being able to tailor that to the Microsoft context to be able to sell the cloud, right? And so what we envisioned together was a series of courses that would be somewhere between 5 to 8 weeks long, take 2 to 3 hours of learner time per week. And it was pretty audacious. Like, we were thinking, hey, could we get 500 learners? Could we get 1,000 learners in a global cohort together? Oh, and by the way, this isn't required because we can't do that. That's not a requirement component. Isn't a thing. But so that raised the bar on engagement. But at the end, maybe we can give a digital certificate to show what that looks like. So let me just show you a few screenshots just to kind of whet your appetite to show you what this experience looked like. So as a learner, when you came into this first program on business strategy and financial acumen, this is what you would see. You would see this kind of clean, panel-based design that those of us who are, all of us, I should say, who are using mobile devices every day, like we're used to touch. We're used to this kind of simple panel-based design. So it's accessible on any device, easy to navigate, and mobile ready. And then on the next slide, let's imagine we click on the course content panel there, and we go to what you would see is very clean menu of content over time. Remember that whole concept of spaced learning over time. You wouldn't necessarily see all the weeks at once. Those would be released over time, but in this example, I've kind of fast forwarded and shown all the weeks. And then you could dive in week 1, highlighted in black there. Then you say, okay, what's the welcome message? There's a video from the instructor, and probably the one of the smartest things that we did together with the INSEAD and Microsoft is we asked the key question is, if this is a voluntary course, why should I care? Why should I show up? So there's an opening video with the instructor talking about strategy and how that relates to the sales environment. And I kind of blew out one of the videos there in the upper right corner, and you could see here that they took the time to contextualize this to Microsoft. You see Satya Nadella's picture in the background. So this isn't just like totally generic course. Of course, the content is quite stable, and it's not, we're not splitting the atom here in terms of the content, the nature of the content. It's not unique, but it's tailored, it's contextualized. And then further, to drive connection in this 1,000-person cohort with learners across the globe, we use discussion forums. So they were given a little scenario where they looked at why a tire company, Michelin, might be super focused and interested in drones, and you can't really pass the mic virtually across 1,000 people. Well, you actually can do it virtually. Use a discussion forum to do that. So I kind of blew out a little image of how the responses happen there with discussion forums. So kind of socially content contextualized and then socially amplified across your cohort globally. On the next slide, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's just a brilliant example of pulling together all of those components we're talking about, where they were able to engage, and as you mentioned, across an extremely large cohort, but feel like they could apply, they could consume the content, which was very engaging, and then they could really, make it their own, or figure out how to apply it. So a great use of that. And, I think one of the questions, Sam, that we often get is, well, how do we measure, the success? Does this matter? What are the outcomes so we can build an ROI around it? And I think this particular example, if it's accurate from my understanding, had an incredibly positive outcome and return. And so maybe you can speak to that, in terms of how did we jump? Well, I'll let you cover this slide and then talk about, okay, so what came out of it and where did you go with that?
Yep. So the big focus for us that we just obsessed on with Microsoft and INSEAD and other partners we work with is application. I mean, at the end of the day, the best measure is application. So each week, learners were applying, salespeople were applying the concepts of the week to their top account. And so essentially, as they're working through the course, they're building an account plan. So what I've shown here is middle of the course, where they're learning to understand the value chains of their customers. How do you map an industry value chain? Well, a great way to apply that to your customer is map the value chain of your customer. So you can see here, what we've blown out in the lower left is what a learner did to map the value chain of a retail customer from production to the store. And they've also, and you can't really see this in the text and stuff, but they've answered some questions about growth and market size. And then critically, they've said, well, what Microsoft solutions do I recommend to my customer based on my understanding of the value chain? And on the right, those little Pinterest-like images you see, that's your peers' work. So you're seeing the uploaded field reports, that the wisdom of the crowds, like we've talked about and experienced today. You see that right there. So maybe we just skip the next slide. It's really just shows how you track progress with a leaderboard. I don't think there's anything too significant there. But to your point, Ray, the real power here is in the outcome and the results. And if we think about what we're up against, like an optional course, right? An optional course resulted in 80% pass rates for a rigorous program that required real commitment. A digital course, we think, well, maybe the best modality at the end of the day, we really think it is getting people together. The readiness indicator score is basically a net promoter score index inside Microsoft. 188 is the highest score they'd ever had in a sales training program, regardless of modality. And then if we think about business impact, it's the field sales executives were looking at account plans created through the course, and of course tracking the impact on revenue, on bookings. So what deals were booked where the learners tied a direct link to the program that they went through. So yeah, impact was pretty clear in this case.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant example, and really articulates how you get behavior change and what does behavior change mean, and if we can actually increase deal revenue, ramp up time, margins, whatever those key metrics are tied to the program that you're focused on, obviously that's fantastic to be able to show the connection. So, I want to be sensitive to our time here, Sam, and as we were looking at these best practices, kind of what can we do to make this work? How do we implement? What are some key takeaways? We have 5 of these key practices I want to go through. We have about 5 minutes to cover, so this is going to be a little bit of a speed round. You will have access to the references, and then we're happy to take this offline or follow up, obviously. But maybe you could walk through, from your experience, what are some of the things to make this collaborative learning work? So let's go. Number 1, focus on the right problem. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is just to get your North Star anchored. This is not a new concept, but it's your time is precious. Think about what problems in your business are really worth solving, what's on the CEO's agenda, and go after those problems.
Absolutely, and I think that goes all the way back to why projects fail, even in traditional sales training. Is they're trying to solve the wrong problem, or they don't even understand the problem. So a great place to start. Okay, number 2, being learner focused or learner first. Talk about that a little bit, would you?
Yeah, I mean, we did a course a year ago. We had learning leaders participate in that. It was focused on building your digital learning plan, and so we crowdsourced. We were learning, we were listening, like we are today, about what's learner first. And that's where this graphic comes from, just for a little bit of context there. But I mean, the things I think are key to keep in mind are ensuring that your offering is intentionally relevant to learners. Again, focus on the right problems, right? From a design perspective, make sure it's simple, it's intuitive, and easy to access. Like in the Microsoft example, obsess on application. Make it all about getting work done. Flip the model. Don't make it about the content. Make it about the application, and think about the content as serving towards giving you the insights and the background you need to apply. And then on the collaboration side, sure, you're going to need self-directed, but balance the self-directed experiences with a collaboration. Give opportunities for individual reflection, but also for peer-to-peer discussion and team-based work.
Wonderful. So keeping that learner in mind, which often the training gets developed kind of in and of itself, takes on a life of its own, and yeah, we forget about who's going to actually be consuming and how are they going to be consuming. So technology partners, there's a lot to choose from. I'm sure everybody's seen the sales enablement technology stack that kind of looks like an eye chart. So how do you select the right learning partner?
Yeah, so it flows directly from the previous slide. You need technologies and platforms that enable you to create and deliver an optimum digital learning experience. And I think there's probably a lot of heads nodding there, like, yeah, got it. But what we see often is the problem of using old technologies and expecting new outcomes, right? So we see much more of an embrace of a digital learning ecosystem approach, whether you're reading Josh Berson's research or Danny Johnson's research. There's an embrace of the ecosystem and choosing tools that are meant for the job.
Absolutely, and I think what's really exciting, from our perspective, is the tools have evolved now to where they're supporting the kinds of things that we want to do that maybe used to be prohibitively expensive, or the idea of embedding video, the production costs were an issue, or things like two-way video where now we can collaborate, we can get real-time feedback for a coaching scenario, those kind of things. I mean, the market has evolved, the technology has evolved, and at a point where you don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to enable some of this technology. So I think it's an exciting time to be bringing these tools together and being able to apply them. I'll take the next one and love to get your thoughts as well. But we believe that the best programs need to be supported, obviously, by great content. But what we mean by that is, to be able to develop content and deploy it in a collaborative environment, kind of all at the same time, is a bit like designing the airplane, while it's going down the runway, and then it starts to fly, and we're trying to tweak it. I think, like your example with Microsoft, they were taking very vetted, very substantial, content that had been delivered thousands and thousands of times, and then you were putting it into an environment to make it collaborative. So the same as I'll say with our sales training content, we've delivered it in the classroom, we've delivered it virtually, the content works, we know where the key concepts are and how to apply it. Now we can adapt that and come out with a very meaningful program. But I think the opposite often happens is we're trying to figure the content out at the same time launching it. I don't know if you have any thoughts or experience with that, Sam, but if we don't have both of those together, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure.
No, that's right. Yeah, nothing to add there. That's great.
Yeah. All right, the final one, at measuring, and you talked a little bit about this with the Microsoft example, but being able to understand engagement and application, and how have you approached that to address this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're moving from old school models that track activities and butts and seats to really being able to track the engagement with content with peers. The behavioral web analytics are just amazing, what we have access to now, and then being able to track work application. And those are the kinds of things that you can show engagement, you can show application. Those are the things that are going to get executives' attention.
Absolutely. And I think building that in, obviously, we need to have that conversation sooner than later. We need to have that as part of the design and understand what the outcomes are and how we're going to measure it before we launch the program. And so I think it makes it that much more important to focus on the right problem and understand how we're going to measure the success. So let me just, I'll pause here with kind of key takeaways, but we started again talking about sales is changing, why it's challenging, and in fact, even why sales training needs to change and adapt and be more nimble and more just in time. And that approaching that with an engaging, collaborative environment allows us to address some of those challenges and, specifically some of the ways to do that. So leveraging cohorts and practice and gamification, things that can help drive engagement, and ultimately putting that learner first, at the center of the design. And as you look at the content, you look at the technology, what is the learner experience, and kind of reminding ourselves about what journey are they going through and how do we address that. So I know we're up on the top of the hour. I really appreciate everybody's collaboration and input. We have a few minutes if we want to take a few questions, or if you want to chat those in, we're happy to follow up offline as well. But Alonzo, I'll turn it back to you. We'll scan the questions as they're coming in here, and then again, happy to follow up as we go. Before I hand it back, Sam, I'd just like to thank you very much for your contributions and collaborating again today. Really enjoyed the discussion, and let's open it up for a few questions, and then we'll wrap up here.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Because it's already top of the hour, we're probably just gonna do one question, and then I'm gonna ask everyone to please, thank you for bearing us with us today. If there is any questions that you have for Ray or Sam, just feel free to email us. We'll be showing a contact information slide at the end. So we'll be happy to follow up with you if we don't get to your question. So here is one. Here's a question from Jennifer Romanelli. She says, as it relates to certifications, how effective do you really think role plays are? I've worked for organizations where a product manager certified their rep or new product rolling out, and it was very subjective, and it didn't indicate whether someone would be successful or not. In many cases, those who could role play best were not effective in the field, and one person resigned after failing a role play. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting perspective. And Sam, I'll share my thoughts and love to get your perspective. I think role plays are one of those that even in a live classroom, people will groan a little bit or they're uncomfortable going through it. And then consistently we get the feedback, wow, that was the best part. I wish we did more. I'd love that. And as we joke, if you're not practicing in some type of role play environment, it means you're practicing with your live customers, and that's a really expensive way to do training, right? That we're just going to go out there and see what works. Completely sympathize with Jennifer's comment that it's not the end all, and you can kind of sometimes game the role play, or maybe you're just a good actor. But I think we need to do that in addition to other skill application of seeing evidence from them, doing assignments or whatever that may be, completing a mission. To see if they've actually adopted the skill. But Sam, what's your experience on that with respect to role playing as well?
Yeah, I mean it's content and context dependent, of course. But I have a friend who's head of product at a interpersonal communication skills company, and they were banging their head against the wall with digital learning and griping about what it didn't do and so on. And she kind of flipped the question and said, well, what is it in the classroom that we struggle with? And one of the things, this is a company that focuses on having difficult conversations. She said, actually, we realized you can't role play having a difficult conversation. Like, that's complete BS. Like, you can't. The only way you can do that is actually in the performance environment. Is you can prepare for it, you can get ready for it, but there is no real real way to practice that other than doing it. So again, it's content and context dependent.
Yep, very well said. So, I'll just comment on one other. It was a question about gamification examples, and to Jack, I'll just share at a very high level. The idea of people as they go through the journey of the program, they're getting some points allocated to that. So they watch a video, they get some points. They do an assignment, they get some points. They contribute in a cohort, they get some points. And we've seen it across a number of different platforms where just by seeing how people are doing relative to an average of the group or relative to their peers increases in engagement. And it's kind of fun to be able to check your mobile app and see how you're doing. Sam, I know you addressed that specifically within your platform. Can you provide another example, and then we'll wrap up here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, using points and badges as well. Badges are more focused on achieving particular milestones in a program, but those game mechanics really work. We've seen them work surprisingly well, and you've got the advantage of having a sales audience too, which just wired to be motivated that way. So we see it drive the right behaviors. If you want people to communicate in discussions, you award points for that. If you want people to give feedback, you give points for that. And then having some kind of value for what those points kind of roll up towards, whether it's a terminal badge or a certification or some kind of reward, is a good approach, and we've seen tremendous results with that.
Sure. Okay, and yeah, there was a follow-up about actual games, and I think there's a whole host of simulations and other things you can do within that, but happy to take that offline as another conversation. So, Alonso, again, let me turn it back to you to wrap up. We have the contact information up here. Obviously, Sam and I love to talk about these concepts and topics, so if you'd like to continue the discussion, please feel free to reach out. We'll be following up with the slides and the recording. So again, thanks everybody for your contribution. Alonso, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ray. Yes, again, really quick, Jack, and then Laurie and Bob, if you watch this recording, if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to follow up. And anybody who may have any questions after this, here's the contact information for Bob, Ray, and Sam. They will be happy to follow up with you. So we're gonna close the Q&A to end this webinar, but really quick, a couple of announcements before you leave. A short survey will show up as soon as I close this webinar. We appreciate any feedback you may have for us, so please fill that form after when it shows up. And again, Ray and Sam, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye-bye.
All right.